Good morning. I was just on a phone call with a friend of mine who I traveled with in Egypt. He was reminiscing about how terrible his Taberah Christmas was many years ago, 2006, and we were chatting about being in Luxor, Egypt for Christmas, and how weird it was. But here we are, Bible study time. Proverbs chapter 29, and I believe I was trying to figure out, because unfortunately a lot of the Proverbs start to sound alike. I think we're on verse 6, if I'm not mistaken. Seem to remember us talking about verse 5 last time. So, verse 6. We'll jump right in, and we'll surely welcome people when they join us. Don't forget that you can reach me on Facebook. You could send me an email. You can there we go. You can send me an email. You can reach out to me on Facebook, and you can even drop me a text if you like, or an email, and I will get that as well. If you have any questions or comments about what we're going over today, we're getting close to the end of the book of Proverbs. I think you're going to find Proverbs 31 to be very interesting. It's one of my favorite sections because it talks about the Jewish definition of a good wife, and that is interesting. Well, for a lot of reasons, and I won't give it away, but you can look forward to that. So we're on Proverbs 29, verse 6. We'll keep moving through the Proverbs. Maybe when we get to the end of Proverbs, we'll have some decisions to make as to what to do next. I think I'll continue doing Tuesday morning Bible study until there's no reason to do it anymore. And I don't know how that'll become clear to me, but perhaps at some point there just won't be any need for it anymore. But until that time comes, we'll be here doing Bible study. We'll have to make some decisions after we get done with Proverbs. So chapter 29, verse 6, an evil man is ensnared in his transgression, but a righteous man sings and rejoices. I think what I'd like to do is take a look at this word for ensnared. Snared. So it's, let's look it up here. The word is mokesh, and it's a bait or lure or snared. Okay, a trap. So, I think that the idea might be here is that I don't think it's a single transgression, but it's the downward spiral of transgression in general. To make sense of this verse. So if you tell a white lie, then you're telling another white lie, and then you're telling bigger lies and bigger lies to keep this story going, or to what will be the word? You get so pinned down in the lie that you can't get out of it anymore, or the evil, or whatever the case may be. It keeps getting bigger and larger, requiring more of your time, more of your effort. So you get to be like, you tell a lie, it grows and it takes on its own life. And then the problem becomes it becomes impossible to maintain all the lies, maintain all the the evil that's going on, the various things, like you see it a lot in people who cheat in their marriages. They remark that, well, we were telling so many lies and telling so many stories, it's hard to keep them all straight after a while. Well, this is the thing. You become trapped by your own transgression, all the extra lies and things you're doing to try to keep, to kick free of it or to keep free from it. It makes it even worse. So it becomes a trap for you. But a righteous man, in other words, a man who does what is right. Now, I don't think this means that a man is perfect, right? There's a difference between being perfect and doing what's right. I think you can do your very best to do what's right, but you can still fail and not always succeed. But someone who's in their mind and heart, they're doing their best to be righteous or to do righteousness, is a different thing than someone who is intentionally lying or doing evil. A righteous man, I think that there's something to be said about works in the sense of this, that I do think that works are not of value to you in terms of your eternal salvation. It's by grace alone, sola gratia. I do think there is in this world that we live in a reality where if we, especially right now, where we're quarantined, right? A lot of us are. And even if we're not quarantined, we're quarantined because certain things are open, certain people are available to us. We can't live our normal lives. Even if we're not necessarily quarantined in our house, we're able to go out. There are certain things you can and cannot do. You have to always be considering, this issue or that issue. Even if you're young and healthy, you're still affected by this thing. It just is the way it is. So there is something to be said, I think, about, I think Jordan Peterson talks a little bit about it, making your bed in the morning, stuff like that. I think there's a naval commander talks about that too, but there needs to be a certain amount of wins in a day. I feel this perpetually as a pastor, especially right now. You have a lot of tasks in front of you: communion calls, sermons, Bible studies, preparation for various things, working on the visioning plan, and there's 1,000 other balls in the air. Inevitably, you go home and you fail to complete some of the things that you were hoping to do. And you've done some things, right? I think that there's something that's just for the human condition that's helpful to be able to point at, whether it's people visited, people cared for, good words said, love shown, something built. I mean, it could be as simple as you clean the garage, say, whatever the case may be. You need to put some wins in the win column, from time to time, to feel as though something is kind of trending in the right direction. And the rates of depression and other mental illnesses have risen a lot, I think, because we've been unable to do our normal lives and achieve and complete tasks and feel a certain amount of self-worth in ourselves, right? I went into a small depression cycle when I was in college. I went home to be with my folks. My dad had a heart attack and wanted to try to help take care of them. I felt this urge within me to do something. More in reality, I probably should have just stayed at college and got done sooner. I won't regret my choices now because they led me to my wife and my children and my life as it is. I can't go back and change things, whatever. But I didn't really need to be there. I felt the desire to be there, a wanting to be there, but I didn't need to be there. My dad was okay without me. My family was okay without me. Being there and spending too much time, I didn't have a job. I thought I was just going to help take care of my dad. And so I wasn't in school. So I wasn't completing tasks. I wasn't doing things. I wasn't accomplishing anything. And it really started to wear on me. You go a whole day without accomplishing anything. You go to bed at night feeling bad about yourself. You wake up in the morning, you feel bad about yourself. So you kind of hibernate in your room. You don't do anything. And then you go to bed at night feeling bad about it. Can you see where this is going? It's a cycle. It just spins downward, right? So I think living a righteous life is not necessarily about being more perfect than another person, like, or maybe better said, being perfect, right? Naturally, you would probably be more righteous than the evil person that we're talking about in our verse here. Um, but I think there's something to be said about living a life and doing good works, um, doing what God has asked you to do. I go home from church on Sunday morning after having fulfilled my vocational duties as a pastor, and even though I'm tired, I feel a certain amount of happiness. I feel complete, or at least that I'm doing the things I'm supposed to be doing. What's that? That I have a purpose, and that I kind of lived my purpose today. Well, that I have a vocation, and I lived out that vocation. I actually did what God was asking me to do. Right? When you're in line with God, you can go home, at night, knowing you're a sinner. Right? That doesn't change anything. You're a sinner, and you need Christ's grace. But at least, like, when it comes to what God's asked me to do, as opposed to what He's asked me not to do, I'm more in line. I wouldn't say as a sinner I'm completely in line with what God wants to do, because I still resist His will. Right? The old Adam keeps rearing his ugly head, but I'm probably more in line with what God wants me to do than the latter, or maybe even more mealy mouthed and better said, I'm more in line maybe today than I was yesterday. Right? As God's word and sacrament has its way with me day after day, hopefully I am becoming more and more like Christ and less like the old Adam. That would be the hope, right? Not to say we don't. I don't want to. We're not. It's not to say that we do not sin or that we're becoming perfect or something like that. That only happens through Christ coming on the last day. But I'm just saying that I think that as the word and the sacrament takes root and takes hold, we naturally grow closer to Christ. I don't think that's a terrible thing to say. Okay. So a righteous man probably rejoices, maybe A, because he doesn't feel guilt, B, because he's not trapped in this circle of lies where he's trying to keep sense of his life. In other words, being righteous makes your life simpler. You give yeses for yes answers, no for no answers, you tell the truth, and you go to bed at night not trying to remember all the various lies that you told and keep your story straight. It's literally less stressful, less effort. Yeah. So I think we see this in a lot of ways. I think sin, of course, can make us feel guilty. It also, like I think of the verses getting at, can trap us inside a web of our own lies. But there's a very basic meaning. I think there's a more in-depth meaning. But I think there is something to be said. We should be righteous, A, because that's what God calls us to do. We should be righteous, B, because it's the right thing to do, regardless of God's calls to do this. It's the right thing to do. We should be righteous, C, because it is going to make your life better. That's where I put that as a priority too, right? You shouldn't do God's word or His will or be righteous just because it makes you feel better, because then it's all about you. But there is that after benefit, right? You're going to feel more in line with what God's asking you to do and be, and truthfully, you're going to be more in line with creation. Bonhoeffer talked about it in Creation Fall, being in the groove. That you're just in this groove, and it's not a bad thing. It's actually a good thing. When you're in the groove with creation, you sleep when you're supposed to sleep. You're up when you're up. You in the winter, when the days are shorter and colder, you hibernate. In the summer, when they're longer, you don't. And you're in groove with creation. You're when it throws a loop at you, you go with it, right? How would that be? When it throws a punch, you kind of roll with the punch, and you're always kind of never letting it really, hit you, but it kind of glances off. And you're just kind of moving with it, almost dancing with it. You're in the groove as opposed to out of the groove. Out of the groove is you resist God and creation and His will constantly, and it doesn't really, And I think of things like, I don't know, maybe like. I watch these I'm kind of an engineer at heart. I always loved engineering stuff. And one of the things I love is these mega projects. They talk about building these mega projects like mega bridges and things like that. And they talk about building a bridge across the Bering Strait to connect Alaska and Russia. And that seems to be a project where we're very desperate to conquer nature as opposed to go with it and roll with it, right? Um, to a certain extent, the Panama Canal, same thing. We're going to conquer nature. Manifest Destiny has a lot to say about trying to conquer nature, to tame it, to control it. The wild reaches of the West. We're gonna dominate them and control them, and by God, we're gonna bring water to the deserts through irrigation and all these kind of things. Whereas maybe if we were a little smarter and let nature actually dictate some of the things that we do. Although I'm also of the mindset that God has put us in dominion over that He wants us to take care of it. So where's the line between taking care of creation and nurturing it and tending it, and then recreating it and making it what we want it to be? I don't know. It's an interesting line. Well, shall we head on? Verse 7. A righteous man knows the rights of the poor. A wicked man does not understand such knowledge. Well, let's take a look at the word for knowledge. I'm curious what's going on there. Da'ath. I wonder if this has any connection to our modern word of data. I doubt it, but that'd be pretty cool. Da'ath, which is from yada. Yada is to know. Yada is to know. So concern, know, knowledge, premeditation, skill, truth, unintentionally. What? Let's see. Maybe we have a I was going to say we had a primitive root, but there doesn't seem to be any primitive roots there. It seems like it mostly starts about knowledge here. Tree of knowledge, good and evil, but primarily looks like it's used just what you know in your head, knowledge. Prophetic knowledge possessed by God. There's a lot of interesting things here. Okay. So, going back to the verse then. The righteous considers the cause of the poor. Well, knowledge is a very general term, and I think the translator here, the translators, I have it in my ESV, and I'm guessing that's the same in the NIV too. Let's check it out. 29 verse 7. The righteous care about justice for the poor, but the wicked have no such concern. Well, that's interesting. They really go. That's a translation. They're making a choice to go that direction, right? So that's definitely, I should say not translation. That's interpretation, right? They're interpreting what they think the verse means. It's not straight translation. But the wicked have no such concern. So, but they are connecting it together. That it seems like both translators are saying that the da'ath, the knowledge, is what we've already learned from the first part of the verse, right? A righteous one. Well, the cause of the poor probably is the knowledge part here, and we talk about this. God, he talks about not that the Israelites should never oppress any sojourner amongst them. Sojourner would be like a resident alien, someone who's visiting from another country. And the context here too is that perhaps the sojourner could actually become part of the people of Israel. A sojourner could be a believer in Yahweh, all these various things, right? But they would be without certain protections because they're not a native Israelite, right? So you can either take care of the person amongst you who doesn't have protections, or you can oppress them. And this is exactly what the Egyptians did to the Israelites. The Hebrews come Jacob and all of his sons come to be with Joseph, and they grow to be a great, numerous nation. And there was a symbiotic kind of good relationship between the Hebrews and the Egyptians. And then a Pharaoh rises up who doesn't know Joseph, doesn't remember him, and he gets scared of the Hebrews, so their relationship turns antagonistic. So when someone within your midst doesn't have power, doesn't have money, doesn't have authority, how you treat them. I think the scriptures point at this too. I don't think there's a specific verse about it. It kind of makes this tempt. I think I feel like another philosopher has actually said this. How you treat the powerless, how you treat the people who have no power and authority, in other words, the people who you have no the people who you have no responsibility for, right? The ones that you could, in other words, if you can get away with despising these people and treating them terribly, and you have that ability, and you won't be necessarily looked down upon or treated terribly. How you treat these people, whom basically there's no social push, there's no environmental push, there's no reward for treating them well. How you treat them will determine what is a very clear understanding of who you are as a person, right? So the cause of the poor would be, God talks about it. How is Israel supposed to take care of the poor? They're supposed to not clean their wheat fields entirely. They're supposed to not clean off the vines entirely. They're supposed to leave a margin for the widows, the orphans, the poor, the destitute, so these people can go out and gather food and grapes for themselves to support themselves. There's supposed to be this mindset that everything is the Lord's. The year of Jubilee is like this, where maybe you've accumulated more land than your neighbor. Maybe your neighbor's been poor, he's struggled, he's sold you some of his land. The year of Jubilee comes around, everything goes back to its original borders. Everything goes back to its original owners. And the point of that is to remind people that everything is the Lord's. You're only a steward of it. You get to take care of it while he's away, but it's not yours to begin with. I think this might connect too with how we take care of the poor, that we should leave a margin on the fields and the grapevines everywhere in life, because ultimately this stuff's not ours, and God has already told us he wants us to take care of the poor, the orphans, the widows, the destitute, these people. So this maybe might be what we would call the cause of the poor. God's tender heart towards people who don't have power and authority, who don't have money. This is something that all Israelites know, should understand, and should identify with. And a righteous one, we would assume that since they're considering the cause of the poor, they're probably not poor. Maybe they're doing okay. Maybe they're even rich. So a righteous, rich, or middle-income person does well to consider the cause of the poor. Does well to realize that everyone doesn't have it as good as I do. I've been remarkably materially blessed by God. So perhaps I should give back. Perhaps I should not be so tight with what I have. We talked about that. What about 5-6 verses ago about the idea of being stingy in these things, right? Sorry, I got a frog. I just can't seem to clear. So the wicked doesn't understand, or doesn't take to heart, doesn't consider the cause of the poor. You could call it selfishness, the inability to empathize or identify with anybody but yourself. Or maybe it is that you understand that people don't have what you have, and so then it's a stingy issue. You're afraid of losing what you have, so you keep it all to yourself. Rasha, we've had this word before, the wicked. So the wicked, either has no ability to grasp it, almost in the sense of like perhaps someone who's like autistic, right, and just has no idea the things they say and they do are. Wait, I'm sorry. That's going to be a terrible thing to say. I don't want to say it like that. Um, the Sheldon from Big Bang, I think, is a caricature of someone who maybe because autistic people do care. They are good people. That was a bad way to say it. He's a caricature of maybe someone who is so caught up in analytical thinking that they don't consider people's feelings, emotions, and stuff like that, right? So perhaps it's that I understand, or perhaps it's just someone is been raised or just doesn't have an ability to connect with real people and their needs. And then you have the people at the top levels of our government at times who, I don't know if it's that they can't or they don't know how, but it just seems like they don't want to. They don't want to connect with people who are in flyover country, right? And sometimes the people on the coast, they have this attitude of everyone in flyover country is country bumpkins, so we're not going to even bother trying to connect with them. I don't know. Lots of ways you can look at this of this evil of just not being able to consider or not wanting to or choosing not to or being arrogant or aloof. I don't know. However you want to describe it. Verse 8. Scoffers set a city aflame, but the wise turn away from it. Oh, actually, we did study this, didn't we? I remember this verse now. Okay. Well, we talked about this, that scoffers, they point out and they mock or they ridicule or scorn the powers that be, the ways things are run, how everything works. They're constantly critical of really anybody, right? So a city would be just a group of people from powerful to just all stripes and creeds, You've got a city full of people. Scoffers are people who scorn and critique and criticize. They can set that city aflame with anger, with distrust, with arguments, right? But the wise turn away from wrath or scorn. You don't really see a purpose in it. Why would I? With our kids right now, how they speak to each other is really a struggle for us. It's consistently hard-edged, consistently, sarcastic. It's caustic in tone. They're insulting each other a lot. They call each other stupid very easily and things like this. And because we haven't been able to get a handle on how they speak to one another, the house is continually fighting, screaming, crying, and is a general place of anxiety. And that's our fault. We haven't been able to master this caustic tone in our own children. As you multiply that by tenfold amongst adults, you can see the problem here. Why would set a city aflame? Verse 9. Again, we did this one as well. If a wise man has an argument with a fool, the fool only rages and laughs, and there is no quiet. Well, I'm consistently concerned about the way in which we debate each other, the way we talk to each other, and the thing that's disturbing is there's very little to do with facts. Even the facts that we use, we skew them in ways that we like on either side of the aisle. And then we use those skewed facts to basically, we don't ever present a fact as in a debate would be, or maybe better said, a conversation, a search for wisdom, right? Would be, what do you think about this? And I take this fact out and I place it on the table and I say, what do we make of this? And then both of us would talk about it and consider it and do our best to understand it. And then another person would say, well, okay, well, I understand what you're saying here. what about this? And he'd pull this fact out, and he'd lay it out on the table. We'd both look at it, consider it, and say, oh yeah, I see what you're saying. And we'd go back and forth like this, but we'd never let it get heated, right? We just hold out facts to one another. We'd be looking at these things as we went through this, and I think the one thing about that is we get learning from sharing data with one another, but we also learn about each other. But most of the time, when a fact is presented in an argument, it is, look at this. This completely refutes your argument. And so a fact is used to burn someone. A fact is used to destroy somebody. We're not trying to help them learn. We're not trying to help each other learn, or we're not trying to learn together. No, we're just trying to use this fact to bludgeon you to death, to put you away, right? And the only reason we're interested in doing that, if we're really truly interested in sharing facts with one another, then what we want is for each other to grow and to change and to learn, right? I'm having this conversation with you because, like, we enter into a conversation. We want to converse with one another because we actually want to grow. We actually want to find out something new, and or maybe not new, but maybe we want to reaffirm things we've already learned. Oh, I've always believed this, but now I understand why I believe it, whatever the case would be. But you only seek to destroy someone because of an opinion, because of a faith statement, or a place where you're at in terms of emotional context, right? If you actually want the truth, then the truth is what matters, and you'll talk with anybody to try to tell them the truth. But if your goal is I don't like what this person is saying, it's contrary to what I'm saying, so I'm going to shut them up by any means necessary, right? So I'll take my facts and I'll use them to shut them up so they stop talking. That's not a search for truth. It's not a search for wisdom. That is just destructive, right? I think that's what's going on here, is that there is no conversation in this verse. There's no back and forth. There's no actual learning or wisdom. There's just the fool has, maybe he wants to defend his foolish ways, or he wants to shoot down the wise and how they're doing wisdom. And of course, remember, a biblical understanding of foolishness versus wisdom is a fear and knowledge of the Lord. It's not ultimately rooted in like scientific numbers or facts, but rather it is understanding the Lord and what he wants for his people. And foolishness then will be the opposite of that, right? Would be disregarding the Lord, not being afraid of the Lord, not worshiping the Lord, not thinking or maybe even going so far as to think he doesn't exist, right? That's foolishness. And perhaps it's maybe giving us a thought too here that maybe there's arguments that aren't worth having. If someone has devoted their life to foolishness, how much good is that going to do you? In a Proverbs kind of way, right? Debating wisdom, talking about wisdom. But perhaps, I've always thought that, and I could be wrong, I've never met a lot of people who have been converted to Christianity through apologetics. Apologetics is making a defense of our faith. I think apologetics is actually more necessary for Christians. That's why we're teaching it to our young people in youth Bible study Sunday morning, that they're prepared when they go to college, because they're going to be inundated with people from college who are going to tell them that their faith is wrong. They need to know how to defend their own faith. But I've never met a lot of people. I mean, there are some. I think there are some, like, I think the guy who wrote The Case for Christ, Strobel, I think, Lee Strobel, I believe that he was researching trying to disprove the crucifixion and resurrection, and it actually ended up proving it to him, right? But it's rare. It's rare. What happens more often is that people are brought to the faith by care and concern, right? Someone shows Christian care and concern for you, whether it's praying for you, supporting you in a difficult time, maybe if financially or emotionally, for a variety of ways. I've heard way more instances of people coming to the church because of that. And I'm not saying that apologists don't have a place. We should know how to defend our faith. I'm just saying I don't know if it's like a first step outreach tool, right? Like I'm not sure how effective taking a soapbox out to the corner of the street and doing sidewalk mission work is. I think you could go out to the sidewalk and offer to pray with people. I think that's a good thing. But I don't know if throwing pearls to swine, so to speak, is helpful. I don't know. I think we have this predilection then in the online world that we live in, especially now, that we should get into arguments online. I don't know if you can't sit across from someone and actually, like I said, pull out a fact and just place it in front of them and actually say, well, what do you make of this? Because I'm having a hard time seeing what you're seeing when I have this fact, right? That shows concern for the other person. But when you're sitting behind a screen, how do you actually show that you actually care about the other person to have an honest debate and argue with them or conversation with them? I don't know how that's possible. The quarantine, the COVID, is especially scary because I think it's really stripping us of this ability to meet with people face to face, which is important. It's hard to show concern and care for someone. I mean, you can do it. But the problem with, sometimes I worry about this as a pastor. Even right now, as I'm just verbally diarrheaing. The problem being a pastor is that you can speak lots of words, and after a while, the words wash over people, and they can seem to just become meaningless. I think that's exacerbated by the online environment, right? Where it's easy to say, well, I'll pray for you, or you can send an email saying, hey, I'm thinking of you, or, what it does is it waters down the impact of human connection. When, I've stopped doing, when you get those birthday announcements on Facebook, I've stopped doing the Facebook birthday thing, and I've gone back, whenever Facebook reminds me of birthday, I send a card. Because it means more. It has oh, he actually took time out of his day to write a message in a card and then mail it and send it. And who doesn't like receiving mail? That's better, because honestly, when you get all the birthday things from Facebook, you just kind of feel stuff like, these are all my friends who couldn't bother themselves to put a card in the mail. You know what I mean? It takes you 10 seconds to reply on Facebook. It takes you a little more time. So it waters it down, and it just doesn't have meaning anymore. I think the same thing happens with conversation. We need face-to-face contact. We need to be able to talk to one another and actually show that we give a rip about somebody. If we don't, if we sit behind a screen all of our lives, it just. So, going on. Let's go on. Verse 10. Bloodthirsty men hate one who is blameless and seek the life of the upright. I can't help but think about Christ here, right? That'd be good. We're talking about a lot of dumb stuff. Let's talk about Jesus. They cry out for Christ's blood. Let his blood be upon us and our children's children. Right? They literally cry that out when he says, "Shall I release to you Jesus or Barabbas?" Right? What do you want me to do with him? Crucify him. And then Pilate's concerns like, this seems like a very harsh punishment for a very inconsequential crime. And they're like, no, let his blood be upon us. We want him dead. We want him dead. So bloodthirsty men hate one who is blameless. So, I mean, you can easily see Christological implications here, right? But then in general, I think, I don't think anybody, it's one of the hard things about sharing the gospel today. In order to share the gospel in its fullness, a person really needs to also preach the law. Well, I shouldn't make the gospel dependent upon preaching the law, but we understand that maybe to receive it, to be properly prepared, for the fields to be plowed and ready for planting. A person maybe needs to confront the fact that they're a sinner, that they have, because of their sins, they are going to die. because of their sins, they're going to meet all sorts of resistance and destruction in the world. But the world is increasingly unwilling to hear the law, doesn't like hearing the law. I've got a young girl in my house who every time you try to correct her, she just won't receive it, just walks away, won't listen. And how do you help someone? How do you correct bad behaviors? What do you do? I don't know. The world, if bringing up sin and bringing up problems, just in the world, if you were to talk to your neighbor and they're like, I've had this is a real conversation. I won't tell you who, like the names, but I've had this. So the person's like, Pastor, I just can't get my life together. Everything is so terrible. And I look at him pretty clearly and I go, well, I haven't seen you in church in 9 months. And immediately there's I didn't come here to be judged. I came here to be helped. It's like, well, I don't know how to help you if you can't realize that being away from word and sacrament for 6 months at a time is not good for you. Right? If you're unwilling to receive any kind of correction, I don't know what to offer you. I don't know what to. I should, not that my whole life is correction, but how do I forgive sins if someone's unwilling to repent of those sins? That's the problem, right? So it is the case even now that when someone is blameless in our midst, when someone actually, and not that the blameless person is trying to shove it in anybody's face. The blameless person is just trying to live according to their vocation. Their very presence, their very life, how they live is the letter of the law to people, and it bothers them. It makes them angry. Just your very life makes me feel bad about how I live my life, and I don't know what to do about that. I don't know. I'm not going to change what I'm doing or who I am so you can feel better about yourself. Maybe you ought to change who you are. Maybe you ought to lift, I feel bad for a teacher sometimes, and I could be speaking out of turn. I used to be a teacher. And if there's a teacher out there who wants to correct me, go ahead. I'll take that hit. Sometimes I think that in a classroom, what happens is, we have exceptional kids, like 5% are exceptional kids. Maybe 5% of kids are struggling for whatever reason. They have a group of kids in the middle. And what we do is we're so concerned about the kids at the bottom falling behind, and the kids at the top are not nurtured and challenged, right? So we're always kind of going down as opposed to maybe at some point we should put out higher expectations and ask everyone to kind of reach and push a little bit, as opposed to being satisfied with the norm or below the norm all the time. A reach for excellency, a stretch for your best. I know that when people have challenged me to do my best, that has always been it's been a good thing. Whether I reached it or attained it is a whole other question. But I was always thankful that someone challenged me to be better, as opposed to saying whatever I was putting out there was okay. Was enough. The very presence of someone who is blameless can make evil, bloodthirsty people angry, resentful, right? So they seek the life of the upright. I think that's why here we have a little note here, but the upright seek. Oh, there's an addition in other translations, but the upright seek his soul. Okay, interesting. Doesn't really change much there. Just a little addition to the verse. I could see someone thinking that perhaps the verse was like left unbalanced, so they're going to balance it somehow. Adding that little piece so it sounds more like a proverb. But so by the way, this little note that I remember from my days in translation and also looking at additional text. So the Bible, you'll have various versions of the Old Testament and New Testament, and they might have additional pieces that other pieces don't. Because remember, the scriptures were copied by hand. And one of the just rule of thumbs, it's just a basic rule. It doesn't work every single time, but just a basic rule would be whenever there's an additional translation or more, doubt the more. right? The simplest understanding is you can usually trust that. So it would make sense, that the verse was complete in and of itself, and someone was, in other words, we as humans think the scriptures need explaining, so we're going to add on more often than we're going to take out. In fact, I would say taking out is a very, very rare thing, because humans know that the ones translating the scriptures know the scriptures are inerrant. You shouldn't be taking things out of them. So usually what the additions are, and sometimes what happened too is that you'd have translations, and then on the margins, people will be writing explanatory notes about verses. And then what would happen is when that was copied, the explanatory notes just got put right into the next translation or the next copy, right? Even though they weren't intended to be parts of the text. So whenever you run into a situation where and it doesn't happen often, I don't want you to freak out about this. It happens very sparingly. And I've never run into a place that, for sure, I've never run into any kind of additional text that has ever made me or that has ever contradicted sola gratia, sola fide, sola scriptura. Never seen that. And never seen anything contradict catechismal faith. There's like sometimes little nuances because of an additional additional piece of text or additional translation, but for the most part, people make a big deal about these. They don't really change the sense of the text at all, and especially the overall message of Christ, that He has come down to save sinners and give them eternal life. That does not change at all, right? Out of the definitive books of the canon, you want to talk about books that are extra canon? Well, then you might have an argument, right? But there's a reason why they're not in the canon, because they're not considered authoritative. So anyway, we have here, the bloodthirsty men hate one who is blameless and seek the life of the upright, because I think their very presence. I've had this happen to me. I'm sure you've had it happen to you too. That people that, like, maybe you just try to do your best. You're trying to do what you think is right, and people are resentful of it. I don't. It seems silly to be resentful of what someone else is doing, as opposed to maybe I should just take a hard critical look at my own life and fix me, instead of being angry at so-and-so for doing what he's doing. Okay, verse 11. A fool gives full vent to his spirit, but a wise man quietly holds it back. Parenting, I don't know how many times we're telling Steph, was that a complete comment? Oh, yeah. Okay, thank you. Yeah, absolutely. And you know what, Stephanie? I think in heaven that's going to be the case, because I think the layers of heaven, there will be certain people will be recognized as having served the Lord, like the apostles, right? Like the prophets. These people will be lifted up, and there'll be people who won't, have special powers or abilities or anything, but they'll just be recognized for the good work they did. But it'll be one of the few places in life where, instead of being jealous of that person, we'll be happy for that person, right? And I think the one place it happens in life, and even then it's not consistent, is your spouse. Maybe your spouse goes to college, gets a degree, they graduate, and you're just really, really proud of your spouse for doing something that's really hard, right? You're like, man, they really busted their hump and they did something great. There's not a bone in my body that's jealous about this or resentful. I'm just really, really happy for that other person, for the achievement that they have made, right? That's exactly what you're talking about. Yeah, instead of being resentful for people's presence, we actually are happy about people's presence in their lives. Because inevitably, I think the reason why jealousy is even a thing is because we look at other people, we see the lackings in ourselves, and we wish we could be that person. And you know what? If you were to critically compare yourself to that person that you want to be like, for example, and I know this because I've gone through this a lot in the last 8 months in my mind. You know exactly what you need to do. You probably even know how to go about doing it, but you don't have the will or the willingness to make those steps, right? I know that I should be swimming every day. I know that I should cut out sugar from my life. I know that I know all sorts of things that I should cut out of my life that would make my life better, make me a more effective servant of God's people. I know exactly what and I could give you 15 more. In fact, I have it right here. Spent a lot of time crafting through it, various aspects of my life that I should be working on. You have it here like life, health, time management. On the back here, I have planning. Terrible planner, such a terrible procrastinator. At the end of the day, you know what it is? It's exactly that stuff. I don't want to, I know exactly what I'm supposed to be doing. I know exactly, I even know how to do it. Right here, I've got like the most basic, easy steps in order to how to get it done. I've thought through these and agonized through this stuff. It's not that I don't know what to do. I don't know how to do it. I just don't want to do it. And that is a problem of the human soul. And I have no idea how to fix it. Because if I could, I'd be a different person, for better or for worse. Okay, so getting back to our verse here. A fool gives full vent to his spirit, but a wise man quietly holds it back. Well, I have a daughter in the house right now. She's my own biological daughter. Okay, so I'll be clear about that. But I won't tell her name. But she'll get in the mood, and if someone crosses her, she'll flip out, and she has no ability to control her emotions at all. It'll be either screaming, it'll be crying, it'll be carrying on. And I just routinely tell her, you need to get a hold of yourself. You've got to you can't let yourself, at the end of the day, your emotions are, the Hebrew idea of nefesh, I think, is great. Like your emotions, your personality, even your physicality. Like a guy like Chris Farley or Laurel and Hardy, right? Their careers were based off of their physicality. Laurel was, if I remember correctly, Laurel was the skinny one, right? And then Hardy was the bigger one. And they made humor. A lot of their humor was just off the basis of their size proportions as people, right? So all these things, your physicality, your personality, your emotions, your wisdom and knowledge, your logic, all these things come together and they make up your nefesh. Who you are, that's your nefesh. All right? And what we do then is we are a person who has agency over your emotions aren't the only thing you are. You are more than your emotions. So in other words, you should have the ability to control them. They are part of you, not the whole. Right now, I'm dealing with a young lady and one of my children who has very little control sometimes to take agency over those emotions and have them be part of her as opposed to rule over her. I think we let our emotions rule over ourselves because we're weak, right? What are some of the worst emotional times for us? When we're sick, we're not feeling good, when we're hungry, right? All these various things. So it takes a certain amount of mental fortitude and strength, which I just don't think she's developed yet. I'm hopeful that she will eventually, but I don't know. And I think we've all seen a person here or there who is completely run by their emotions, and it's a scary thing. It's a roller coaster ride as well, because you just don't know what to expect minute to minute, day by day. So I think it's actually a fairly wise thing here, and a fairly modern idea as well, right? A fool gives full vent to his spirit. In other words, he lets his emotions, his moods, his personalities, whatever they are, rule him, as opposed to him, his whole nefesh, having agency over the various parts that make up himself. I can take control of this. And in fact, you know what? I'll even admit I do this as well. Sometimes I can get in a foul mood and will not offer the kind of grace and personableness, kindness that I should in all circumstances. Like There should be no bad day. There should be nothing that should happen to me that should make me angry enough and moody enough where I should ever treat anyone poorly. That just shouldn't happen. It does, but it shouldn't. That's what the verse is getting at here. We ought to have control over these emotions and moods. They are merely part of who we are. We should have agency over them as opposed to the opposite. But I think somewhere we don't want to admit, somewhere in our soul, that perhaps we like letting our emotions rule and run the day. Perhaps we enjoy being angry, or we enjoy being grumpy, or we enjoy being sad, right? Almost as much as I think we can all identify we enjoy being happy. We enjoy having joy. But I think sometimes we have to admit that we enjoy, sometimes I think I enjoy being guilty. That I think like being guilty makes me a more righteous person than you. So I'm going to wallow in guilt, even though I know better, because Christ has wiped away all sin forever, including mine and more. I should know better than to sit and wallow in my own guilt because Christ has forgiven me. To sit and wallow in my own sin is to turn everything inward on myself as opposed to being worried about people outside of me. And that's what my sin does. My sin somehow perverts this whole thing to make me think that it's righteous to care only about myself. It isn't. Christ never cared only about himself. Even when he was tired and hungry and everything else, he always had a compassionate heart for the people that were coming out to him, right? So, I don't know. We have to, I suppose when it comes to maybe having control over our emotions or our spirits or our moods, we might look to Christ, who had every opportunity. He had every excuse to run out of, as Janelle's saying here, run out of patience with people, and he never did. He never did. Although that bar is awful high. I don't mean to say that. I maybe just saying this. I don't want you to feel like you're a failure if you can't meet that bar, right? Because that's Christ. He's perfect. You're not. But maybe it ought to be our goal. Maybe we ought to try to be more like him every day. Again, not that we're ever going to hit that goal, but we ought to at least try. That's what God is maybe calling us to do, is to be more and more like Christ and less like ourselves. Okay. The wise man quietly holds back his spirit, his moods, his emotions, whatever the case may be. You know what? And I might maybe revert back a little bit to like a Jordan Peterson, the topic here as well, and just some of the things he's. I think I've gone too far myself, saying that people should feel their emotions and cry their tears and these kind of things. I think they should. Don't get me wrong. Don't shove down my throat. But I think at some point, we were put on this planet to care for other people. I, as a husband, as a father, my primary concerns in life is not for me to feel my emotions and for me to feel my moods, but my primary job is to take care of my wife and to take care of my kids and to console them and love them and make sure they have enough food to eat and they're safe. That is my prime. I get to feel my emotions after all that other stuff is done. That may seem backwards. Quite frankly, I don't care. Maybe our grandparents and our great-grandparents had it right, because these are people who served and loved, took care of people, and did what was right. And somehow we got really obsessed with, my grandparents. I hear like people my parents' age talk about their parents. My parents never let us talk about it. They never let us cry. They never want us to. It's like, okay, what exactly is the problem with that? Explain it to me. Well, these were people who sacrificed deeply to make sure you had a better life. I'm not sure I understand why that is a bad thing. You know what I mean? There's a strange disconnect with catechism, which I don't understand. Like, our parents and our grandparents and our great grandparents are really good about sending our kids to church and to Sunday school and catechism. But this is where where I feel like I want to move more towards the emotion side. They weren't very good about talking about the faith in respect of, not that you need to go to church, but like actually, how many times did your parents or your grandparents or your grandparents say to your parents or your great grandparents say to your grandparents, I go to church to hear the word of God because in my heart of hearts, I look in the mirror and I see who's there and I see a sinner. And I know I'm a sinner and I need God's grace. I need help. That's why I'm there. That honest, sincere, like, this is what my faith is about. This is why I go. This is why it matters. Whenever I do funerals, I see it a lot where like the family is like, well, they made us go to Sunday school every Sunday. They made us go to church every Sunday. They made us go. Well, that's fine. That's great. But like, what did they actually say? What did you know about them? Like, what did you know they actually thought and felt and believed, right? I don't know. I am here. I firmly believe I am here because my father sat, we had open lunch. So I would come home for lunch at my house. I didn't live far from the school. And my dad would usually be there for lunch as well. And I don't know how many times we got into conversations over lunch. And he talked to me about the church. And he talked to me about his own personal faith and about his father, my grandfather, about what he taught as a pastor. My dad actually told me that he was a sinner. I remember him crying tears and saying that he was a sinner and he needed grace. He needed Christ so much. And it was the sincerity. It was the sincerity of faith and belief that had a great impact on me. I don't think all emotions and all moods and all things are helpful. But I think if you're going to do one thing, be sincere with your kids. Not just tell them why Christ should be, that of course that's important, right? We should be teaching them apologetics and why we believe in Christ and why it's important. But maybe occasionally you gotta slip in there that I believe in Christ because I need him, because I'm broken without him, because I want to live with him in the new heavens and new earth. I want to have eternal life. It's why I'm here. So I miss those conversations. My dad. Let's close there, okay? You guys have a great day. Sorry to get emotional when I just said don't get emotional. But I miss having those conversations with my dad. Blessings in the rest of your day.